Hello there! It's not Thursday, it's Friday because we've moved the day of this, and welcome once again to the best movie podcast ever, the only movie podcast to offer objective and hyperbole-free discussion of every movie in the known universe. I am your host, the wrestler with no name, Konrad, and with me as always, Austin316 says he just booked your ass, it's Anthony James.
I'm back! Here I am.
There he is. With Eric Bischoff's theme music. If you are already feeling snowed under by references you don't understand, I apologise because it's only going to get worse from here, folks. We're here to talk about wrestling.
It's not as bad as it could have been, Konrad. When you were saying what your name was, I was about to go, it doesn't matter what your name is.
We'll have to try and get at least one it doesn't matter in this episode. So, for those of you who are perhaps new to the show or didn't listen last week, we are doing wrestling movies this week because WrestleMania is coming up. And although Anthony and I are kind of, I suppose I describe us as like erstwhile wrestling fans, like we sort of keep our noses in, but don't really sort of pay that much attention apart from when exciting stuff sounds like it's happening.
I think probably once every 2 years I'll go through like 2 or 3 months of watching everything.
Yeah.
And then I'll shift back in and just read.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I do as well. Like, I'm actually in the middle of one of those at the moment. Like, I've been going pretty hard on it, and then I know what's going to happen. Something's going to piss me off, and I'll be like, well, I'm done with that for the next 2 years, and I'll dip my toe back in. But we're striking while the iron is hot here. WrestleMania's coming up, folks. Everyone's talking about it. It's the talk of the town. I couldn't even tell you where WrestleMania is happening, to be honest. But we are here to talk about wrestling movies. Movies, not movies with wrestlers in them. Movies kind of centered around the business of wrestling, so to speak.
Some of the films do have wrestlers in them, though.
Yes, that is true. Some of the films also have wrestlers in them. It's going to be a whole thing. But yeah.
And ironically, actually, Connor, I was going to say a couple of the ones we're going to talk about are documentaries. Now, if you're someone who's already starting thinking, "Am I going to listen on in this podcast?" Well, there are a couple of documentaries which, if you don't know anything about the wrestling business, listen to our reviews of these or chats about these documentaries, and these might be something you want to check out just to sort of get an idea of what the wrestling business is.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't care about the actual movies we're talking about.
Yeah, like so the documentaries we're going to discuss here, I would put up against most other documentaries and say these are genuinely like really, really compelling watching. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so without further ado, let's talk about some wrestling movies.
Let's do it.
Wrestling movies. We've just told you that we're going to talk about them. If you haven't switched off by now, I don't know what you're doing. You're in it. You're in for the long haul. Thanks for sticking with us. So
ding ding ding.
Yeah. The next boat. I don't know what that was. I was kind of doing like I thought I was going to do a Mean Gene Okerlund then, and it sort of turned into a Michael Buffer about halfway through. I don't know. It was a general announcer kind of voice. So right. I've divided this up into kind of, I suppose, 3 sections. So and they're not that populated, I'm going to be honest. But so I've got documentaries, which is where I thought we'd start because that's the serious talk. Then I've got based on real life wrestling movies, and then purely fictional wrestling movies.
Okay. The based on real life wrestling movies, I have none for, but I'm sure I'll have heard of, if not seen the ones you've got.
You've got one. We've just talked about one off air.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, yeah. See, it was so mystical and magical of a mean,
let's be honest. They took some fucking creative liberties with that with that movie.
Vince Vaughn does not work for the WWE.
No, and I'm pretty sure The Rock wasn't friends with Paige either, but. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, folks. But yes, The Rock will be mentioned. But so I'm gonna start us off here. We're gonna go chronologically, I guess, through these. Although there's only 1 year between these two, and I would say these are probably the two. As I said in the intro, 2 of the best documentaries I've ever seen. The first one it was a made-for-TV documentary, which is actually really hard to get a hold of now. Fortunately, I own a DVD of it, and I think I might have bought this twice because I believe I gave you a copy of this DVD, and I don't know if you still have it or not.
I do still have it, but I did not get it down for this viewing. I'm going based on memory.
Okay.
Which so are you, but yours is a more recent memory.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I haven't got it here off to the side, folks. This is all off the dome piece.
This is all coming out of the memory.
So this is Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows from 1998. And to briefly set up the scene for this documentary, it's kind of like an unprecedented look behind the scenes of the WWE, or the WWF as it was at the time. It's a documentary directed by a guy called Paul Jay, and the documentary crew are following the kind of superhero Bret Hart, who was my favorite wrestler when I was a kid, around his kind of last days in WWE. At the point that the documentary starts, he doesn't actually know he's leaving, but he's in his 40s. He's kind of getting to the point in his career where he's got maybe one big contract left in him, and there's sort of stuff going on behind the scenes in the WWE that is making him consider leaving. There's like a big sort of tonal shift as they're moving towards the Attitude Era. So what were you going to say?
I was going to say WWF at the time.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to keep referring. Like we're going to mix our WWEs and WWFs here because it's just going to happen. But they
and for anyone who doesn't know, it changed because World Wildlife Foundation sued them.
Yes, and they basically said, okay, we're going to be WWE now. But it was WWF for the first 14 or 15 years of my life, so I still will occasionally slip into it. But basically, I think in the late 90s, Vince McMahon, the guy who runs the WWE, was basically, he was letting people behind the scenes because I think he was trying to capture that like kind of MTV Attitude Era thing where, you know, it was like, we're gonna do things we've never done before and show people what's going on in the wrestling business. And I don't think he quite realized what was going to happen as a result of both this documentary and the one we'll talk about later, because this documentary is famous for capturing one of the most infamous real life incidents in wrestling history, which is I don't want to spoil too much, but we kind of need to say this so that you understand why this documentary is so compelling. What's called the Montreal Screwjob, where
I just want to break the audience in on something, Connor, before you explain this. Wrestling is scripted.
Oh, sure, yeah. It is scripted.
So you need to like, don't sit here thinking these two jabronis are...
We're not marks.
Got it in. Yeah. that we're sitting here thinking that it's all real. Like, the funniest thing
it's
ever...
It's still real to me, damn it!
Yeah, me as a 30-year-old man, someone comes up to me and goes, you know it's fake, right? I'm like, come on. Like, what are you talking about?
So is the Avengers, really, all right, sir? The Avengers is fake as well. Tony Stark isn't even real.
Yeah, that's what I say. Have you ever seen a movie?
Yeah.
So it is scripted. You need to know that. Yeah. And the wrestlers know what's going to happen at the end of a match before they start. Like, they know who's going to win.
But I mean, that's one of the... I think, personally, there's two things I still find fascinating about wrestling. It's like the actual athleticism on display in the ring, because it's almost like a kind of dance to get the fans invested, and, you know, the crazy feats of athleticism a lot of the wrestlers are capable of. And then there's the backstage element, where like wrestling is scripted, the winner is predetermined, they're not actually, well, they're kind of hitting each other, but they're not trying to hurt each other. Then there's this whole like politics behind the scenes, which...
Who's the top guy?
Yeah, who's the top guy, who's kind of going to the boss and saying, I'm not going to lose to this guy because he's coming up and I don't want him to take my spot, and all this kind of stuff. And I love that stuff. It's very kind of... Yeah. It's very kind of like a sewing circle gossipy kind of stuff, but I got to admit, I love it.
Yeah, because it's interesting. People wouldn't know this, but even though it was all scripted and they choose who's in the main event and stuff, the further you are up on the card, like if you're in the main event, you get paid more than everyone else.
Yeah,
you know, so it does matter where you are. So if there's a young fella coming up or young woman coming up who's really good at what they're doing, really entertains the crowd. Then the people at the top are thinking, geez, I have to shit on them.
Yeah, I've got to watch out for this guy because they're not taking my spot. And that, you know, the wrestling business is full of people, you know, like your Hulk Hogan's and even, you know, Stone Cold Steve Austin's, who were kind of, when they were at the top, they were pretty shitty. They was like, no, I'm not losing to this guy because that's the future, and I'm not getting, even if you're in your 40s and you're injured or whatever, you're not giving up your space. And this was the case with Bret Hart here. So this documentary crew is following Bret Hart around. About halfway through this documentary, he gets given this like unprecedented 20-year contract that's worth loads and loads of money. And WWE at this point was in like dire financial straits because WCW, the rival company who don't exist anymore, were beating them in the Monday Night Wars, like two Monday night shows that went the ratings wars for their shows on Monday night. And it became clear that WWE couldn't pay Bret Hart this contract and started kind of pushing him out almost. And there was a guy in the WWE along with Bret Hart called Shawn Michaels who they did not get along with, and Shawn Michaels was famous for being like, oh, I'm ill, I can't lose, or, I'm going to drop the belt without losing it because I've injured myself. And Bret Hart really didn't like him. And what followed was the Montreal Screwjob, where Bret Hart was told one thing, and then in the middle of the match, Vince McMahon, the owner of the company at ringside, called for the bell and basically told everyone that Bret Hart had lost his last match in the company and he'd lost the title. And that's captured live in this documentary, and it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, because this is it's a crazy occurrence, and it sort of maybe comes across as something not as crazy as it is because people who aren't wrestling fans. But this is what you have to this is the strange thing, especially at this time. The belts weren't registered. This is so strange, the setup. The belts aren't registered to the company. They're registered to like the Wrestling Federation or something, like back then anyway. So if Bret Hart he was about to leave the company. Yeah. And so if he didn't lose that match and if he still had the title, then he would technically have been able to take their title and go to a different company with that belt.
Yeah, and he could have turned up on WCW TV with the title. And it's this great... I love this kind of... so the theme of this documentary is kind of like the death of the hero in wrestling. And it really works because WWE was moving towards the Attitude Era at this point. Like Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was obviously a bad guy, he was flipping everyone off. He was giving everyone stunners, drinking beers, and the fans loved him for it. And Bret Hart was very much like, wears pink, he's a good guy, he's a classic babyface, a good guy, basically.
He's the best wrestler in the world.
Yeah, and one of the best wrestlers in the world to boot. And he'd been with the WWE for I think like about 20 years at this point, and he was basically saying to them, look, I'm not going to take your belt and show up on another show. I would never do that to you. Let me just lose on my own terms. I can't lose to Shawn Michaels in my last match in Montreal. I won't lose to him in Canada. He's been shit to me throughout my entire career. Let me just lose on my own terms. And WWE and you basically capture all these people saying to him, yes, that's fine. We respect your wishes. We'll do this thing, and then they capture them completely lying to him and double crossing him, and they've got full access to it. It's nuts. You see Bret Hart spit in Vince McMahon's face after the match ends. They capture.
He punches him too, but I don't know if they capture.
No,
that.
So they basically follow Bret Hart into the locker room where he punches and knocks out Vince McMahon, and then you see they kind of do the old camera down at the side trick, and they see kind of like Vince McMahon kind of staggering out groggily. It is nuts, the access that this documentary had. And it's so compelling. It's a classic story of a good guy who is kind of being screwed over. But there's lots of like kind of interesting little, I suppose almost, they're kind of little seeds for where the WWE would go in this. So you hear the phrase sports entertainment mentioned in this documentary, which I didn't remember until I watched it again. And that wasn't a phrase that I thought, I didn't think they started using that phrase until way later, to be honest.
Well, that's really interesting to me because this is actually just the dawn of the Attitude Era, really.
Yeah.
When they're filming this, like Stone Cold wouldn't be the biggest guy yet, So like the way it's going, it's really interesting to me that they're already talking about sports entertainment because obviously later on, 2005, 2006, they sort of completely stopped saying wrestling.
Yeah.
And it's all about it being sports entertainment. But they hadn't even went through their
they hadn't gone through like their wild
yet.
Years, exactly. Yeah, so it's still, you can see like the kind of kernel of that germinating even at this early stage, even though they wouldn't kind of arrive at it as a sort of company-wide ethos for 10 years after this. I also have to say this movie is way funnier than I remember it being. So that there's which we'll come back to this later, but Bret Hart's dad is a guy called Stu Hart, who is like this man who he looks fairly innocuous because he's probably in his 80s when this is filmed. He's quite dumpy, short guy, but he has like the look of a serial killer in his eyes, and he's a famous like shoot wrestler, which basically means he can actually stretch you and hurt you and break your bones if he wants to. And there's audio of it, like he famously has this thing called the Hart Family Dungeon where he trains everyone, and there's audio of him taking these two cocky young guys into the dungeon and then like stretching them, and you can just hear them screaming, and it's like something out of one of those true crime documentaries where it's like, how did we not see the signs?
It's like found footage.
Yeah, exactly. You can hear them like crying downstairs, and he's just like, have some dignity, and like slapping them.
But that's the thing about that's the thing about wrestling documentaries as well, is you'll have all the wrestlers sitting there going, he was a hard man, and they're talking about this guy who used to just go and torture people, and they're like, but that's the business, man.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
the business. It's like, no, that's terrible.
Yeah, like the way Bret Hart describes, and I kind of approach this with a wry sense of humour now because it's just so ridiculous. But the way Bret Hart describes his relationship with his father, it's like, that is abuse, Bret. What you're describing there is abuse. He'd be like, my dad would like stretch us before we were allowed to eat for for dinner and stuff. It's a Stu Hart. I wouldn't want him to be my dad. I'll say that right now.
Out of curiosity, I can't remember exactly, but are the cameras there whenever Owen Hart dies?
No, so Owen Hart died after this was
After Bret
released.
left.
Yeah, so I think Owen Hart died he died at Over the Edge 1999. So Owen Hart was Bret Hart's younger brother, and he fell from he had a gimmick where he was like a superhero who was taking the piss out of Hulk Hogan basically, and he'd rappel in from the rafters. I think Over the Edge 99, which I think was halfway through the year or something, he died.
He just didn't buckle in one time.
Yeah, so I mean that is, and people always kind of say this about wrestling, not just documentaries but old school wrestling. You look at it and it's like, how many of these wrestlers are still alive? Because painkiller addictions and working through pain and other drugs and alcohol were so prevalent, and this is a shocking example of that. Like there's a moment where the whole kind of Hart Foundation, where his stable of friends are gathered around. It's like Brian Pillman, he would be dead within a year of this. Owen Hart, he would be dead within a year of this. Davey Boy Smith, I think he lasted a couple of years. Jim Neidhart, I think, died relatively recently, but was still
2 or 3 years ago.
But he was still pretty young. I think he was in his 60s when he died. It's it is shocking. Wrestling was a hell of a business back in these days, and I think, to be honest, that kind of adds to Bret's point that like his whole thing is like, oh, this is a business that will just chew you up and spit you out, and he wanted to go out on his own terms. And then when you watch it now and you look at all these wrestlers who are dead, it's like, yeah, he had a point.
You're right, Bret.
yeah. As it and he's the one who's pushing for unions for wrestlers now for exactly that reason.
Because it's actually mental that the Supreme Court in America ruled that wrestlers who are contracted to companies like WWE are not employees. Nope. They are independent contractors. Even though everything they do is described as an employee,
they can't go and work for someone else. They can't take independent bookings. They don't get healthcare, and if they get injured, the company can just fire them rather than pay them when they can't work. So it's
ridiculous.
Yeah. So I think that seems to segue. That idea of the business chewing people up and spitting them out seems to segue quite nicely into another very famous documentary, 1999's Beyond the Mat, by Barry Blaustein.
Barry
Blaustein, yeah. And as is often the case with any conversation that I have with someone when I'm telling them that I like wrestling, it starts with an apology for liking wrestling.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to call me an idiot.
Yeah, he starts off the documentary as if people watching it aren't going to be wrestling fans. As if he's going to break the barrier and everyone's going to know everything about wrestling because of his film.
Yeah.
But he starts off watching TV being like, I've always loved wrestling. As if like everyone watching it is going to be like, why is this guy watching wrestling?
Yeah, what are we doing here, guys? I thought this was going to be about gymnastics. But this is another very intimate look behind the scenes. I mean, this one, focuses. It's more of a, I guess you'd call it an ensemble cast. So it really focuses on
3 different.
Yeah, so you've got kind of a group of young guys kind of coming up. Mick Foley or Mankind at this point, kind of at the peak of his career, and then Jake Roberts and Terry Funk kind of at the end of their respective careers. I say at the end. Terry Funk, I think, is still working now. We'll get into that in a second. But it's basically looking at the various stages of a wrestler's career, and this is more made up of memorable moments for me. So I think the one for me that always stands out is when Darren Drozdov, who had come to be known as he was a football player, I think, and he would become to be known as the Droz, and he's basically going for an interview with Vince McMahon, and they decide, because he can puke on command.
He can throw up on command.
He can throw up on command. Vince McMahon decides that he's going to be a character called Puke who will vomit on the referee before each match. And the way that Vince McMahon like seamlessly slips into like, oh, can you vomit for me into his he's gonna puke, like doing his like full on he's gonna and it's just it's unbelievable.
And then he doesn't.
No, then he doesn't, and he fails to, and it's very anticlimactic. But Vince McMahon is great in this.
Which is a really interesting, like, to be honest with you, this documentary, it starts with one of the only bits of levity that the documentary has. Like, there are a lot of moments in the documentary that you could laugh at, but this documentary is actually a really sad view of these wrestlers' lives, and you come out of it just thinking, I'm never going to be a wrestler. Like the two wrestlers that it focuses on, Terry Funk and Jake the Snake Roberts, the two older ones, they're sort of past their prime. Yeah. They're literally I think Terry Funk's literally in his 60s when this was made. Yeah. And Jake the Snake's probably in his 50s, late 50s even probably. And they're sort of over the hill of their career, and they're not working for the big companies anymore. And they're literally going around getting a couple of $100 for an appearance and wrestling, putting their bodies on the line. And like for Terry Funk, it's very much a physical toll it's had on his body. Like, the man can't even walk.
Oh, that scene with the doctor where he's like, there's a scene with the doctor where the doctor's like, if you don't retire and get knee surgery, we're talking about chronic debilitating pain for the rest of your life. Your left knee's already gone, and then Terry Funk is like, oh well, let me tell you something. Like, if I don't know, he doesn't say let me tell you something. That's me going to wrestling mode. He said let me ask you something.
Let me tell you something.
Every 60% of all wrestling promos start with the phrase "let me tell you something," normally followed by Mean Gene. He says let me ask you something. If I retire now, can I get around comfortably? And the doctor incredulously responds, you shouldn't be able to get around comfortably now, which implies that Terry Funk is just a badass who puts up with chronic pain all the time. His body is just shattered at this point.
So Terry is definitely the physical toll on a body.
Yeah.
Whereas Jake the Snake, the mental anguish of that man. It's you're talking about, like, in Wrestle with Shadows, it's like looking into a serial killer, like Stu Hart. I don't understand how Jake the Snake Roberts isn't a serial killer. No. After watching this movie.
Yeah, he like some of the stuff. I think I have a suspicion. I don't want to like cast aspersions about the man, but I think some people have questioned some of the stories that he tells in this. So there's a very famous scene in this where so for those who don't know, Jake the Snake Roberts was a very big name in the 80s. Terry Funk was more in the 70s and like not in WWE, so a lot of like kind of casual fans probably don't know who he was, but he was a very big deal as well. But I think a lot of a movie we will talk about in a minute is kind of based off of Jake the Snake Roberts, like a guy who was a very big deal and is like just chasing that dragon, trying to eke out every bit of fame and glory he can from a career that's way past its best. And like going from the scene of him performing in some gym in, I don't even know where it is, somewhere snowy, it's probably like Minnesota or something like that, with fans who I don't want to speak ill of the people that they pick. All I'm going to say is I think Barry Blaustein very specifically picked the people that he put on camera in this movie to represent a certain subset of wrestling fans. They're not the brightest of fans. They seem like nice people, but I feel like there's a sort of a subliminal message being sent there by the director and the people that he chooses. And like, that Jake the Snake Roberts is like walking around before his match in like tracksuit bottoms. He's like pissing in a bucket that's just and he's just eating McDonald's and taking a bunch of pills and then passing out on a table. It's the grimmest shit. And then you get these moments where he talks to the camera candidly about his experiences. His stepfather, who was like a father figure to him, getting electrocuted in his I shouldn't laugh, but it's like the number of things that he reels off are so
it keeps coming. Like, I think even like I don't really want to say it in explicit terms, but he's basically a product of abuse as well. Like, his mother was 13 years old whenever he was born. That's even just that alone would be mental. Well, but then he literally lists about 12 things.
Yeah, like, one of his sisters is like abducted and murdered, and they never recover the body. And then there's a scene after he says, what the situation around his parentage is, where he and his father just stand hitting rocks with hammers in his back garden. It's a scene which I believe is completely set up for the purposes of this documentary, which makes it even funnier, like in a dark way, because there's literally no point to what they're doing. They're standing around hitting rocks in a garden, with sledgehammers, and not talking to each other for what seems like 50 minutes.
And we've been told that his father essentially like abused a 13-year-old.
Yes.
You know, we all know the harsh word I don't want to use here because I'm talking about a real case. Like, I don't want to, you know, but we all know this. And then 5 minutes later, we hear his father say, standing right next to him, he was born in love, and I still love him now.
Yeah, it's just holy shit. Like, this is like, yeah, as you say, Jake Roberts is a messed up guy. He seems like he's doing better now. Like, God love him. I hope
DDP.
Yeah,
the bad
DDP
guy of Ready to Rumble saved him.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that. But I don't know how he made it through a lot of this, to be honest, because he is a wreck at this point. You know, he's smoking crack all the time. He's trying to re-establish his relationship with his daughter, who, you know, for a lot of wrestlers in the 80s, they just never saw their families because they were on the road, you know, 300 days a year.
Ooh, yeah.
And failing spectacularly, to be honest, which is, you know, not that surprising. But he's also like one of the funniest characters, one of the funniest people in the movie. So there's like, you know, after he does this show and this shit,
he's not the funniest. I will say.
He's not.
I'll talk about the funniest in a minute.
He's not the funniest. I'll give you that. But like the after he does his show in this shitty little town, and he's like, goes on this diatribe about how he could be mayor there tomorrow, and they'd execute the real mayor and put him in power. And when he they're on the road and he finds some chocolate on his jacket, and he's just like, what the fuck is that? Is that chocolate? And like starts scratching at it in a very funny way. Yeah, I think the only other thing I'll mention about the old horses in this is that this is one of Terry Funk's many retirements. This was the first one. I believe he was working again within 2 years of this movie coming out, and is still working now into his 80s.
I know. I think even in the credit roll it says he's still working.
Yeah, that's right. By the time this movie releases, it was like Terry Funk's unretired already. So
yeah. Okay, so I said that Jake Snake Roberts isn't the funniest character. I'm sure you know who I'm going to say is. There is a former wrestler by the name of Dennis Stamp that appears in this documentary.
I can't talk about him without bursting out laughing.
Now, unfortunately for old Dennis Stamp, he's from the same place as Terry Funk.
Yeah.
So Terry Funk's the big man in the town. Like, he's the guy who made it. Whereas Dennis Stamp, he's like, honestly, even if you don't want to watch this film, just go and look up the Dennis Stamp
It's like an American
YouTube.
Office or Parks and Rec's character snuck into this documentary. Like, the way he behaves.
Yeah, like the director goes up to him and says, basically, I can imagine says to him, show me your workout routine. Right, so the first thing you see of this man is him doing this former professional wrestler. His workout routine is to hold two tiny dumbbells,
like 6
while
pounders,
bouncing on a trampoline. Saying,
I don't do any tricks, as he does this on a trampoline. And you know, very very candidly saying, you know, that it gets to be that there's a longer time between bookings, so I need to stay in shape because I don't know when the next one's coming. It's like, I don't think the next one is coming, Dennis, to be honest with you.
Oh, or is it not? Because he shows up at the stadium for Terry Funk's big finale, big retirement match, and he hasn't been booked.
Yeah, so he shows up to tell him he's not coming, like the day before, because he's not been booked.
This is a documentary. This isn't like a fictional thing. He shows up to tell Terry Funk that he's not booked and he's not happy about it, but he'll not be coming. He'll not come because he's not booked. Terry Funk, like, basically, it's like dealing with a 3-year-old child.
Yeah, you've got to make concessions.
He has to be like, come on, you know, I'll let you referee some matches. And then when he's like, no, I'm not coming.
Yeah, and we start doing the like, I've already made some plans, Terry. I've got a flight to catch. He hasn't got a flight to catch. There's no way he's got a flight to catch.
Yeah, and then Terry's like, well, I want you to referee the main event.
Please referee me and Brett.
And it's like literally like a little puppy turn around. Like,
he's and they get like, you know, immediately all those plans he was talking about are just dropped as he's like, oh, I'm going to referee the main event. And Dennis Stamp, God, he is a breath of fresh air in this movie. He really is. He is a farcical character, and I can't believe he's real.
And then in the main event, like in the retirement match, you just see him there in his referee,
His skin tight referee shirt.
Yeah, so proud of himself.
There's something to be said. Like it's funny actually going through these movies. Like we'll get into depictions of old wrestlers as very depressing, and indeed there are some very depressing depictions of old wrestlers in this documentary. But Dennis Stamp is like clearly just Barry Blaustein clearly saw him and was like, I've got to get a lot of footage of this guy because he is an absolute joke. And there's also like talking about other comedy characters. I can't actually remember his name now, but there's a guy who runs the wrestling school who is clearly a con man. And like
Roland?
I think it is Roland, yeah. And they keep cutting between him saying something that is clearly not true, and then his students contravening what he's just said. So one of his young up and comers is like, sometimes he just won't pay us. You know, he'll say you only get paid if he thinks you had a good match and deserve getting paid. Cut to Roland saying, "Oh, they're always paid, and they're paid well. They're loving it." And it's just like,
Yeah.
You absolute con man. And then they take these two guys to have a tryout at WWE, and
The only reason that's happening is because of this documentary.
Almost certainly, because neither of these guys were ever got a sniff of a WWE ring. Even Mike Modest, who had a pretty good career, I think. And there's a moment of reflection for this Roland character as he begins to cry because Mike Modest hasn't made it basically to the WWE, and he's basically saying, for someone like Mike Modest to not have a contract with the WWE is a travesty. And then without missing a beat, Barry Blaustein, who's also the narrator, says that this agent will take a 40% cut of any contract that these guys sign with the WWE. Like, he absolutely knows. He's just cutting straight through the bullshit. This is a great movie. It's not as I suppose it doesn't have as much of a narrative kind of perfection as Wrestling with Shadows. Like, Wrestling with Shadows is kind of like it's like a lightning strike of a movie. Like, there's like you could film 1,000 documentaries and never capture anything as unlikely to capture as that. Whereas this is a lot more kind of, it's an ensemble. You see a lot of interesting sides of a lot of different interesting characters. But I think I'm trying to think if there's anything. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to mention about it actually, which I'd forgotten, was Jim Ross, good old JR, when they're watching the two up and comers having their match, what's called a dark match. So before television starts, they just do it for the live audience, and one of them doesn't move on the other, and JR, in the most deadpan way possible that only JR can manage, is just like, that's pretty spectacular, and like, just no enthusiasm for it whatsoever.
But then Vince McMahon walks over, and then another one does another move, and Vince McMahon's like, "Oh,
yeah, gee, we need a little work there."
Almost like someone almost died.
Openly criticizing them. Yeah, it's great. And you do get to see in this kind of a couple of backstage segments for the Mick Foley stuff. He's WWE champion, I think, at this point. So you get to see like The Rock and Steve Austin wandering around, and it's really funny seeing like The Rock before he's clearly had elocution lessons and kind of dropped his. I can't actually remember where The Rock grew up. I think he might have been Texas, but I think it's somewhere in the South. So he's got quite a strong accent at this point. Before he adopted the accent he now has.
Yeah, my mind went Memphis, but I think that's literally only just because he used to have mutton chops like Elvis.
Yeah, that's true. It could easily be Memphis. Let's have a look. Where was he?
I'm not exactly sure. I don't know where it was.
I was born in California. I feel like it's not a Californian accent he had in this, but maybe I'm just making that up.
Maybe he went to college in the South somewhere.
Yeah, he went to. I think he went to Miami because I had a video about.
Well, no, he just must have been putting on a little bit of
a
twang.
little twang.
He was in like Louisiana on that night or something.
Yeah, and he just put it on. Drawl. Just put it on for that particular video I watched of his. But yeah, so I think that's good. That rounds us up for documentaries. Both very good, and I think, to be honest, both are almost impossible to get now, so you kind of have to just watch them on YouTube or whatever. Hopefully it's
Beyond the Mat is currently on Netflix in the UK.
Oh, is it? I did not know that. Okay, I watched my DVD of this, but they
I have the DVD of this too, actually.
I feel like someone should put a Blu-ray release of both of these together, but they're probably lost in licensing now. But we're going to move on now to movies based on real life. I've only got the one for this because I don't know if there's There is another one which I'll probably mention in this section, but it's not. I haven't seen it, and I have no interest in seeing it. But this is a. I think you'd agree with me when I say this is like a shockingly high quality movie for WWE productions.
Not shockingly for me. Not shockingly for me, and I'll explain why in a minute once you say what it is.
So this is 2019's Fighting With My Family, written and directed by Stephen Merchant of Office fame, and with a pretty killer cast. Florence Pugh, Lena Headey, Nick Frost, Vince Vaughn. The gang's all here.
Yeah, and it's a story of a woman who, up until very recently, was a current WWE wrestler.
Yeah.
Called Paige or Soraya. Yeah.
Yeah,
Soraya Knight. And so she is from England, from Norwich, and she basically was from a wrestling family that eventually got a trial. Now, some drama in the film, and it was also drama in real life. There's certain aspects of this film, like Paige's story itself, is very true for the most part.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah, it's more the side characters that are just like
the trappings are not as realistic, but her actual journey seems to be pretty much what it was.
Yeah.
And basically, it tells the story of a young English girl. I think she was very early 20s, if not late teens.
She was 18 when she was signed, I think. So
yeah, so really, really young, and she got signed to the WWE, and it's about her going over and sort of making a name for herself. But unfortunately, in real life now, she suffered injuries to her neck, and now she basically has to retire at the age of 26 or 7 or something like that. Which, based on the documentary we just talked about, maybe that's a blessing in disguise. But yeah, so it's an interesting time this film came out. It's because it's sort of, I think it started getting made before she had to retire.
Yeah.
But by the time it came out, she was retired at the age of 26 or 7 or whatever it is.
So I think when it came out, she was still under contract, but she'd been on the shelf with injury for a long time, and people were kind of starting to say, I don't think she's coming back from this.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that The Rock obviously was a main driving force to getting this film made.
Yeah,
because he learnt of Paige. I call it just. I'm not going to go as far as call it Paige. That's a wrestling name.
Yeah.
So he learnt of Paige's story, and then very much said to her like, we should make this, needs to be a film. So I think he was the driving force behind it. Hence the couple of
inserted himself into a narrative that he was absolutely nowhere near.
They did that to get eyes on the film, to be honest with you. Did. And he's not unwelcome, but definitely those moments where The Rock just turns up and starts doing his thing just take you out of the narrative of the story.
Yeah,
like I could see someone who isn't a wrestling fan maybe going to see it because they know The Rock's going to be in it and then liking the story for that. But at the same time, I was going to watch it anyway, and I think that I've seen The Rock do his thing. I don't really need it,
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't think it adds that much. Like you say, I mean, it adds superstar name value. Although I've been very open about my feeling that The Rock is like one of the highest paid stars in Hollywood, and I don't understand why, because he's never made a good movie, or has made very few good movies.
Welcome to the Jungle wants a word.
Yeah. Welcome to the Jungle's all right. Walking Tall's okay, and this is this is good as well. But I mean, he's really just a bit part player.
He's not in this film. Like he's not an actor in this film, even though he's top billed. He's not really in the film.
He's in like three scenes, 2 scenes, I think, and one of them he just does a promo, basically, just does a Rock promo.
Yeah, and I was just saying the reason why I wasn't shocked this film was good is because I genuinely have a deep respect for Stephen Merchant. I think Stephen Merchant was the Hart in that Merchant Gervais pairing of The Office, Extras, Life's Too Short. The stuff that Ricky Gervais has done since him and Steve Merchant split up, because they have split up, and whenever they're asked about why they split up, they never comment on it, or they just say everything's okay. They just don't do anything together anymore. I don't know why. It's I think I'd probably get annoyed working with Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, because Ricky Gervais is a cock, by any chance.
yeah, exactly. But I know I genuinely have a lot of faith in Stephen Merchant as a filmmaker.
Yeah, you can tell he wrote this as well. Like, it's so funny this. And I think Stephen Merchant writing for the kind of Edgar Wright style actors in the form of Nick Frost is a match made in heaven as well. I don't like sort of talking about comedies by just picking out jokes, but there is one particular joke where Zach Zach Zodiac, Paige's brother, is talking about his fiance and the soon to be mother of his child coming for dinner with and her parents coming for dinner, and he says that his dad, played by Nick Frost, needs to wear a shirt, and Nick Frost's delivery of "Who does he think he is? The Archbishop of shitting Kent," like it's so funny. And then the subsequent scene where Stephen Merchant and I can't remember the actress name, but she's been in loads of British comedy, turn up, and the back and forth between those two and Lena Headey and Nick Frost is so good. It's one of the funniest scenes of the whole movie.
Yeah. Because they come in as the parents to the
Zodiac.
brother's girlfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're like talking to her about, they're talking to them about wrestling, and trying to make an earnest effort to ask questions, but clearly don't really know what to say. And it's got that very, I don't want to call it naturalistic because it isn't naturalistic, but it's kind of like pretend naturalistic, where no one will say anything for a while, and then Stephen Merchant will do that thing where he goes, "Oh, did you want to say something?" And then he does it all the time, and it's always funny. So yeah, it's you can tell Stephen Merchant wrote this because it is a very funny film.
Yeah, and like Stephen Merchant's little cameo in it is very akin to like his cameo in what do you call it? That Taika Waititi film. It's literally the Nazi film. Just of course.
Jojo Rabbit.
Jojo Rabbit, yeah. Like I don't know how I forgot the name of Jojo Rabbit, but basically, like he comes in, is one of the funniest parts of the whole film, and then isn't.
Turn up, be hilarious, leave. Like that's basically Stephen Merchant's modus operandi. But he's
what I love about this. The perfect thing about this film is that the reason Stephen Merchant got involved, you just know, it's because he was he was in the Tooth Fairy.
Oh, I didn't know he was in the Tooth Fairy. He's
in the Tooth Fairy. So
apparently he's
clearly
a fan.
That's where him and The Rock met.
I think he is a fan. I'm not 100% on that, but I remember reading somewhere.
Fan of wrestling.
Yeah, that might be one of those bullshit things where like after they're hired to make the movie, they're like, "Oh, I've always been a fan of WWE," but I've definitely heard someone say it.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I just assumed that he sort of got his feet wet in the business to. It could easily be that as well. But yeah, like the film is a really nice portrayal of the character in particular. I do really like it. I was saying to Konrad before we did this, I watched this film around when it came out, and it is only since then that I've seen like Little Women and stuff and know who Florence Pugh is.
Yeah.
And going back to talk about this film now, and I'm like, oh my god!
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't even realize.
It's nuts that Florence Pugh, like we were saying beforehand that like 2019 was like the year of Florence Pugh between this Midsummer and Little Women, and she was just knocking it out of the park in everything she did. And it's kind of crazy in retrospect that she was in a WWE production movie, which they are famous for making trash movies. Basically, I know you're a fan of Knucklehead. Like, or what's the one where Triple H looks after a group of kids on a school bus? Is it The Chaperone?
Yeah,
I think it is The Chaperone. Yeah, or The Marine 5 starring Randy Orton, or The Miz, whichever one The Miz is in. Yeah, but that's the kind of, or The Condemned 3 starring Mr. Kennedy is probably one of those. I don't know.
What I love about The Miz, right, is that if you're a fan of reality TV in America, but you're not a fan of wrestling, geez, you're gonna love the fact that The Miz is still about.
Yeah, like he's still trucking old the Real
Mike
World.
The Miz Mizanin started off on The Real World, and now he's like been in wrestling for 15 years.
I hated him so much for so long, and like he's genuinely grown on me as like one of my favorite guys now. He's an example of working hard. Can get like getting you to where you need to be. But yeah, I mean, I think probably just to round off about this movie, the two things I will say about it is there is some genuine craft to like behind the camera. Where I don't know that much about. I'm trying to think if I've seen much that Merchant has directed apart from this, but there's some really nice shots, some really nice photography. And although I find it a bit odd that the narrative just kind of skips out the whole bit where like Paige won the NXT Women's title, the first ever winner of the NXT Women's title, I think it still works quite well, narratively speaking. It still flows quite well. So I mean, I think this is genuinely a really good movie. Like I would recommend this even if you don't particularly like wrestling. It's kind of an underdog sporting story essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. yeah, I really liked it, and I think that it'll be a while till we get another wrestling film which is as good, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that.
There is a long gap between wrestling films that are good. We'll just, you know.
Yeah, well,
There's maybe 2 ever made.
Yeah, well, a case in point, I had to go and look this one up because I only know about it because of the next film that we're going to talk about. But there was a promoter in the 70s called Vern Gagne. I think he was a promoter for the AWA, and he made a movie called The Wrestler about himself. At the end of his career, he didn't play himself, but he essentially played himself at the end of his career, basically having to come to terms with his career ending. And I wanted to mention this in the kind of real or based on real life section, just because it's funny that this movie exists. I've never seen it. I've heard it's terrible, but that movie does exist, and there is a solid 30 years between that and fighting with my family. So
okay, well, I will say that there is another one coming out.
Oh, is there?
It's been announced that there is going to be a Hulk Hogan biopic.
Oh my god. Well,
Chris Hemsworth is going to be playing him.
What? Chris Hemsworth?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. Is he going to gain like 100 pounds? Chris Hemsworth?
I'd imagine so, yeah.
I am not. Well, okay. We'll come back to Hulk Hogan in a second because we'll talk about him in this next movie. I've got a fun piece of trivia about this next movie that I'm going to talk about. That is ridiculous, though. I'm glad that you...
I don't know how they're going to navigate the Hulk Hogan thing, considering that he had that whole...
Yeah, they're going to get into the bit where he's a massive racist.
Yeah, and then whenever... like, he's out of the business for like a year and a half or something after he was massively racist, and then he comes back...
And everyone tries to pretend it didn't happen.
Well, he came back and gave a talk to the locker room in private, but then all the black wrestlers came out and said he didn't apologize for anything. He said just don't get caught.
Yeah, don't get caught saying racist shit and you'll be fine, guys. That's Hulk Hogan's approach to the modern cancel culture.
Looking forward to that being covered in the film.
I can't believe Chris Hemsworth has agreed to do that. Well, okay, we'll circle back to that in a second then, because I'm going to shift us now into fictional movies with I guess probably the most prestigious picture on this list, which is 2008's The Wrestler, directed by Darren Aronofsky and starring Mickey Rourke. It's very similar, as we were saying before, to the story of like Jake the Snake Roberts. It follows a fictional wrestler called Randy the Ram, who was kind of a big deal in the 80s and is now kind of eking out a living working at like a convenience store and taking increasingly violent and disastrous bookings at smaller and smaller venues as his career dwindles. And essentially, at some point during the movie, he finds out that health issues are going to force him to retire, and he must have a kind of reckoning with his own fate. As a result. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I think a lot of wrestlers criticize this movie for being a just about as bleak as it can possibly be depiction of the career of an elderly wrestler, but I think it's a really good movie.
Really good movie. And what those wrestlers don't want to admit is really realistic movie too.
Yeah, I think a lot of the wrestlers who criticized it are in like the kind of WWE Legends program where they pay Mick Foley to show up like a couple of times a year and do a promo and whatever, and that that's all well and good for Mick Foley, but there's a lot of wrestlers who aren't at that level who this happens.
Like, did they not watch Beyond the Mat? Like, did they not watch Beyond the Mat? Like, they literally exist. An interesting thing about this film is, if you haven't seen this film, but just check it out. It is a really good film, just of its own note. It's probably the best quality film that has ever been about wrestling or will ever be about wrestling.
Yeah, I would say so.
I can't really see. I can't really see it unless Hulk Hogan one might blow us away. But who knows?
I mean, that'll have to go in the fictional section though next time we do one of these, because there's no way that's going to be truthful. Yeah.
So this originally actually Darren Aronofsky was writing, and I'm a fan of Darren Aronofsky. There's certain things he's done which I'm not like that big a fan of, to be honest with you. But I like this and I like Black Swan. And I originally, when he was writing this, it was originally a film that was about a wrestler and a ballerina who were a couple.
Oh, really?
And then eventually it was too much. The two worlds of ballet and wrestling were too much for one film, so he split it into Black Swan and the Wrestler.
Is that true? That's a great piece of trivia. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. Also crazy to think about it, but it's another one where I just didn't know at the time who they were. But Evan Rachel Wood being in this film is fantastic. I assume, if I remember correctly, she plays his daughter.
Yes.
And of course, in Westworld, which we're going to be covering on the After Dark podcast, she is the main star of Westworld. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I'd not put two and two together actually, but that is obviously her. Just 10 or so years on, I guess. There's some great little. I mean, that's more of a cameo, more than a cameo. But there are some great little bit parts in this. So I like seeing Peter Parker's mum turning up as a stripper in this. Marissa Tomei.
Marissa Tomei, Jerry.
There's a I don't want to steal their joke, but there's another podcast I listen to that always rails about the fact that Marissa Tomei's stripper character in this is also getting a bit too old for her job, and is kind of like, the young boys don't want me anymore, they want the younger strippers, and they're very much rail against the fact that, like, have you seen Marissa Tomei and what most strippers look like? Because like she would do fine as a stripper, I promise you. I don't want to be too chauvinistic on the podcast.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's skirting a line, but
no, listen, like you can live your life being comfortable that you've never visited a strip club.
All I'm thinking is, come on, like she's clearly telling the truth, because she was so low on things that she went out with George and Seinfeld. So
that's a fair point.
But she might have a point. Like, only George is after her.
Listen, George's got a great personality. All right.
Yeah, no, he does not.
No, he doesn't. He has a terrible personality. So I said I'd talk about this. I'm going to talk about it now. Hulk Hogan claimed that he was first offered the role of Randy the Ram in this movie. Aronofsky disputes it, says that didn't happen. Like, so you decide.
What world are we living in? Like, can you imagine
Mickey Rourke or Hulk Hogan?
If Hulk Hogan was in this film, it would be seen in the same light as Spy Kids.
Yeah, like this.
You know what I mean?
Have you seen Suburban Commando? Like, this is like Hulk Hogan is not going to be in this movie.
Like, it was even, what was that huge series of films? It was called The Untouchables or something, where there was like, what was it called? Like, there was a load of action stars.
What the hell were they called? The ones with Sylvester Stallone in them.
Yeah,
Expendables.
The Expendables.
Yeah.
So there's like Jason Statham, Sylvester Stallone, or like basically Ronda Rousey eventually. Every like action star or like action adjacent person was in these films.
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan?
No place for him.
No.
No place for him. He was even in a movie
with.
I'll mention it now, just a brief mention. He was in a movie with Sylvester Stallone, so he had an in. He played a wrestler in Rocky 3. He played the wrestler Thunderlips.
That's true.
In a cross sport bout, very much the McGregor versus Mayweather of its day in Rocky 3.
I think it does. It is a peek into Hulk Hogan's mind, though, where he watches this film and then thought of making up a lie that he was offered.
He's just like a congenital liar, I think. Like, I think there's an interesting thing about the wrestling business where you kind of have to separate the people who play the characters from the characters themselves a lot of the time, because unfortunately a lot of your favourite people or favourite wrestlers, particularly from the 80s, are going to be absolute scumbags, and Hulk Hogan is top of the pile with an absolute bullet. Like, he is a piece of shit and a liar, and the fact that he thinks anyone will believe him when he says Darren Aronofsky offered him the role of this before Mickey Rourke, even when Darren Aronofsky himself says that is not true, is just it tells you a lot about Hulk Hogan as a man.
Yeah.
But he's not the only wrestler who appears, or should I say doesn't appear, in this movie. There's a great little scene where Randy the Ram has a what is essentially like a hardcore death match with the real wrestler Necro Butcher, who is very soft-spoken, and it's great. He's the guy with like kind of big hair, who's kind of tall and overweight, doesn't look like a wrestler, and that's kind of his thing. He's not really a wrestler. He just puts staples in people's heads and stuff like that, which is not really my style, to be honest, but some people.
Yeah, but that does exist, like, that real hardcore wrestling.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't actually realize that guy was a real wrestler. Of course he would be. Like, there's a couple of real wrestlers that appear. Yeah. None of the huge names, though, because obviously WWE was in no way affiliated with this. But
they did. I think they did promote it, because I vaguely remember Mickey Rourke was on Raw a couple of times, Monday Night Raw. So
well, you give them money, they'll do anything.
That's true. Yeah. I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger once was on Raw and hit Triple H with a chair, and I don't remember what he was promoting, but it wasn't anything to do with wrestling. He was just there and hit Triple H with a chair, which was good.
Hugh Jackman was on Raw one time.
Hugh Jackman was
the Jackass. I actually really have fond memories of like the times when celebrities would just randomly
I
come.
do not have fond memories of that. What was?
Certain times I do, actually. Certain times I do. I always really wanted Kane to light one on fire, but it didn't ever happen.
Could it not have been Kevin Federline? Could that not have been the one that he lit off?
Federline.
Britney Spears is...
He did show up.
He did show up. Yeah, he hosted Raw.
There was an episode with Kevin Federline.
Yeah, I think he had a feud with John Cena, if I remember correctly. It was a fucking
Hugh Jackman
nightmare.
though. Hugh Jackman was there whenever Real Steel came out. That was only about 4 years ago.
Wrestling's dumb. Wrestling's a dumb thing. I regret this episode now. But yeah, so that's The Wrestler. It's a really good movie. I don't want to spend too much longer on it than that. That is well worth seeing if you want to see some legitimate craft. And I think, Anthony, I'm going to let you talk about the plot of this next one because you've watched it most recently. And I think we're going from a pretty high note to one of the lowest notes I've experienced in quite some time. What's the last movie we're going to talk about here, Anthony?
Okay, so Connor, I want to preface this by saying I hadn't seen this film until like yesterday, so
Yep.
I knew it existed.
Fresh eyes on it.
Yeah, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't know it was made in 2000. All I knew was the title. All I knew was the title.
Okay.
So I was assuming that this was an 80s film for some reason. I just assumed wrestling film. It was probably made in the 80s, right?
Yep, sure.
So I will say, while watching it, I was like, now I don't know how to approach this because is this a film that like Konrad watched when he was like 12? And actually really liked when he was 12, so therefore he has nostalgia for, or is he going to recognize how truly terrible this is? I think he does recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface like what you're saying here by saying I watched this for the first time when I was about 14, and I hated it then, and boy do I hate it now.
So it's called Ready to Rumble. It came out in 2000.
Yep.
Directed by Brian Robbins.
Yep.
And basically, it's about two wrestling fans who are the biggest marks you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Now, they're adult wrestling fans, but they still believe it's 100% real.
You wouldn't know it to speak to them either.
Yeah, sorry?
You wouldn't know it to speak to them either. Like they're adults in a sort of chronological sense, if not any other sense.
Yeah, exactly. Like they act like children.
Yeah.
Like 100%. They act like children. Especially David Arquette. He is the biggest. I don't know how did they watch this movie, his performance in this, and think
nailed it.
That's our champion.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is. I mean,
because if you didn't know, David Arquette actually was the WCW heavyweight champion in real life.
Yeah. So those of you who've been listening to this podcast the whole way through will remember at the beginning when we were talking about Wrestling with Shadows, I said Bret Hart went to WCW, which doesn't exist anymore. This is part of the reason why, folks.
Yeah, because they took this guy and they made him the champion. Now, okay, so basically the film is about these two wrestling fans who still 100% buy in that it's all real,
yep.
and therefore they support their favorite, the King, Jimmy King, who I will say, straight away, played by Oliver Platt, by the way,
yeah.
I will say, most unrealistic thing about this, he's been undefeated his whole career,
yeah.
and he's still loved by the fans.
Yeah. Yeah, like they would have gotten so sick of him by this point if he's been like wrestling for 20 years and never lost.
Like they were booing John Cena after like 3 years.
All
like,
the boys would hate him as well. Like the idea that anyone would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna come to this guy's defense." Like no, this guy's like the Hulk Hogan. He was keeping people down to keep himself on top.
Yeah, so basically they took just like The Wrestler takes a lot of inspiration from Beyond the Mat. Ready to Rumble takes a lot of inspiration from Wrestling with Shadows because Jimmy the King is screwed out of the title.
Yep.
And then the film it's very strange, Conrad. They're skirting the line of sometimes talking about like Jimmy the King will lean in and go, "Here, give me a suplex," or whatever.
Yeah,
like they show that it's not real. But then the film turns into him actually having to go and train for a match to win the belt. Oh, hang on. Not just to win the belt, because people who don't like wrestling are going to watch this and think, what the fuck does he care about a belt for? Throw in $1 million.
Yeah, $1 million bucks as well.
So he's going to win the belt and $1 million, right?
Yep.
And he's got to actually, like, it's just not even mentioned again. Okay, so is this a wrestling match?
Yeah,
or is this just like him
he has
going
to
crap
beat
out
up
of him?
DDP in the ring, apparently, because it just doesn't make, it's this really weird, like, balancing act it tries to strike between being like, oh, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, wrestling's all a show, and being like, oh, DDP, that son of a bitch, she's turned on him. Like, which one is it?
it's like it's so strange. It's like an underdog story, but it's not an underdog. They turned it into an underdog story by taking like the main guy in wrestling and turning him into what's essentially an MMA fighter, right? And he has to learn how to fight, and he has to like train up. But not only that, it's like that sort of underdog sports film.
Yeah, well, it's like
set in the
it's
wrestling
helping him
world.
get his groove back. You know, he was on top, and then he suffers the defeat, and they've got to bring him back up to fighting form.
But he suffers a defeat. Like he may as well be starting to train as a ping pong player. Like he's not an MMA fighter.
No.
He's a
like Oliver Platt as well. I will say for him, he's one of the funniest things about this movie, which is not saying much, but he is pretty funny. But fuck me, like in a movie that has like Goldberg in it, and you look at Goldberg next to Oliver Platt, and it's like, did you do any exercise for this movie? Oliver, like he wears like a full body chainmail suit, or not chainmail, it's like studded leather or something, and it's pretty obvious why, because he is clearly not in wrestler physique kind of shape.
Yeah, so they went like the costume. It was all right, but only for like if he took it off after the entrance, potentially. But okay, so if you want to watch a underdog sports film where he rises up and wins, go watch Warrior. Go watch Rocky.
Yeah.
Don't watch this. If you want to watch sort of like a slightly off the wall comedy around the 2000 era, go watch Joe Dirt.
Yeah.
Go watch Basketball. Don't watch this.
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially...
So it's not winning in anything it does.
No, like, this is essentially someone saw, like, American Pie and thought, let's do an American Pie tie-in with wrestling, and it's got, the pop-punk soundtrack. It's got, like, Litz, My Own Worst Enemy in it. That like, the wrestling kind of replaces the sex jokes. But it's just... But it's not... I mean, American Pie isn't one of my favourite movies by any stretch, but, I mean, it's competent at what it's trying to do. This is fucking trash. The only thing that I think this movie is notable for is like the wrestlers that we see in it. So we get to see like a maskless Rey Mysterio Jr., which is good fun.
Yeah.
We get to see
Sting.
Yeah, Sting turns up, which is great, and punches a man for implying that another man might love him, which is a sign of the times for sure, that you could like get away with a good guy doing that in your movie.
I will also say that it did, like Sting had the issue that he in this film that he had in his own career, is that this man who's standing in this black and white makeup and he looks so fearsome, and then he opens his mouth and he sounds like a puppy dog.
Yeah. They just don't let him speak for most of the time.
Yeah.
and they make the bold choice of giving Bill Goldberg quite a few lines, which doesn't really pay off. But I mean,
well, he eventually went on to star in that one with Adam Sandler. What was it called?
Yeah, that's true. He did. He did do a bit of acting, but he's not the most charismatic of guys. He's better when he's just like being quiet and destroying guys.
But he does love his son.
So we talked about he does love his son. That's true. Yeah. Not as much as Titus kiss my son on the lips, O'Neill.
Guys, just to say, if you don't really know much about Bill Goldberg, I just want to put it there. I am not implying anything nefarious with him and his son there. He just really does love his son, and he just like
he gets him in the ring with him.
Always talking about how much he loves his son. Yeah, like that's all. It's just a bit of a meme.
Yeah, Titus O'Neill does kiss his son on the lips though, which I'm not a fan of. Not a fan of that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's the same with what do you call him? I forgot. That's the second thing I've forgotten today.
I'm trying to think who you're talking about.
Super Bowl.
Not Scott Payton. What is his name? The guy who was the Patriots.
The best football player of all time. That guy.
Yeah, we listener, you know who we're talking about. The guy was on the Patriots and then went to the Buccaneers.
Yeah,
that
and
guy.
then he kisses his son on the lips for far too long.
Yeah,
in front of cameras. That guy.
Yeah, the guy's a bit of a dick. Totally aside from the fact that he kisses his son on the lips, he's also a bit of a dick. That guy. Yeah, Titus O'Neill does that. I don't know what's up with that. I don't agree with it. Hey, talking about things that I don't understand. What's up with Joe Pantoliano in this movie? He plays the bad guy who screws Jimmy King out of his match in the beginning, and I feel like he's supposed to be Native American, which like he's wearing kind of like what looks like a native jacket and has what looks like
he's not Native American. He's just wearing the native jacket.
But he's got like
Tom Brady
like a native.
Is that guy's name. Tom Brady's his name, by
Tom
the way.
Brady.
Before you comment, we know. I looked it up. Yeah, he's wearing a Native American jacket. He's the owner of WCW.
That's not true.
WCW, I think, were involved in making this film.
Oh yeah, they were.
So they don't really
100%
paint. They don't really paint their management in a good
No,
light.
no. I find it really funny that Vince Russo, as this was going on, was booking David Arquette to win their world title, and somehow that makes him look worse than Joe Pantoliano's character does in this in this movie.
Listen. This film is for the most part actually trying, not necessarily trying to be realistic, but there's nothing that sort of goes beyond the pale and becomes like, oh my god, what the hell is going on, to the point where it's like fantasy. No. But I will say, what's Joe Pantoliano?
Joe Pantoliano, yeah.
Yeah, he's there's a moment where he's got Sting, and he's like saying to Sting, he's not getting that belt. You need to basically stop him. Like, Sting's the wild card. You're going to stop him winning, right? And then he's walking out of the room, he turns around. Now, this is the owner of a big publicly traded company. He turns around and goes, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you.
That came out of nowhere, that line. It's like, we have seen nothing to indicate that he has the capability to kill a man. And then he just threatens to kill, like, Sting for some reason.
As if he's a Bond villain. Yeah. Like, let's go.
I feel like it might... Yeah, there's a lot of questions I have about Joe Pantoliano in this movie. Is he an Italian playing a native, like going back to the dark old days of spaghetti westerns? What are his motivations? Like, why is DDP in a stable with, hold on now, Sid Vicious, Kurt Hennig, Perry Saturn, Bam Bam Bigelow, Six Pack, Conan, and Prince Iakea? That stable is just like, that doesn't make any sense. And the thing, like, I will say, this movie is absolute trash. They almost made me enjoy a bit, though. The ending made me laugh out loud when I won't spoil what happens, listeners. Don't worry if you're going to go off and watch Ready to Rumble. Like, we won't spoil who wins. But in a climactic moment, the team of Booker T, Goldberg, Billy Kidman, and Disco Inferno, and Gordy, one of David Arquette's character dressed as a cop, show up while Kid Rock's Bar With a Dar Bar is playing in the background. It's one of the most year 2000 ass moments in a film I've ever seen. I was like, this, you could take this scene, put it in a time capsule, fire it into space, and like just say to aliens, this is what humanity was doing 21 years ago, because it perfectly encapsulates all the terribleness of the year 2000 as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's one or two things I want to say before we go here, though.
Go on.
First thing is, one of the aunties from Sabrina's in it.
That's true, yeah, she plays Jimmy King's baby mama.
Yeah, so she's in it. Also, when his son turns up, what the hell is going on?
That was an unexplored plot line that I could have just as well done without, to be honest.
Yeah. What's going on?
He beats his son. His son betrays him by just completely, without any explanation, his son betrays him. Jimmy King beats him up, and then it's not mentioned again. So it's just like, well, okay, that was a good plot line, wasn't it?
Yeah, like, and also like this the phone call, like who called who there to get the son involved? Like, it's so strange. Yeah. But okay, so also the Shermanator from American Pie does show up. He goes onto a website. It's called Hacker World or something like that, and he's literally got on a website about hacking. His career
trajectory already on the downward slope by the year 2000. The Shermanator, he'd done American Pie, it would never get better than that.
Exactly. But the last thing I want to say is actually quite a positive thing about the film. Right? Yeah, it's not quite positive. It's a little bit positive. So I thought at the beginning, right, whenever they're going through the drive-thru, and what do you call it? Scott Kahn's character, Sean Dawkins, he's yelling through the fast food window, being like, "Hey, Brittany," and there's this blonde, good-looking woman. He's like, "Hey, Brittany," and he's like really trying to like try it on with her. And she's just like, "Fuck off, you idiot!" And she like she hates him, and she's like, "Oh, you're such a dickhead," and stuff. Like, she absolutely hates him, right? And then like after they get the food, right, Gordy goes, "It's not really working with Brittany, is it? And then he's like, "It will, man. She's my girl or whatever." He's like, "She's the one or whatever," right? And I just thought to myself, see if he ends up with Brittany at the end of this film. Like, no means no, man. Like, she said no to you.
She clearly doesn't like you.
Yeah, and I was just like, please, like, this film was made in 2000, so I could see it ending up with him with Brittany.
Yeah.
But no, he doesn't end up with Brittany, and I was just like, okay.
No, they parachute in a nerdy character for him to go.
Yeah, his heart actually he moves to a different woman. And I really like that because I'm just like, just because I was relieved he didn't end up with Britney. Like, let's be honest.
I think my only positive about this movie is that Rose McGowan is in it, and I quite like her as an actress. Although apparently she hated every minute of making this movie and has never seen it. So
I don't blame her. She's basically she's unfortunately filling the role that female wrestlers filled at that time.
Yeah, just eye candy, basically.
In the wrestling world. Literally just eye candy. To the point where they didn't even cast her as a female wrestler. She was literally just a cheerleader for the wrestlers.
She was one of the Nitro girls, which, it tells you all you need to know about this film's attitude towards women. You would do well to never watch it. Cool. Okay, well, I mean, I think that's a pretty encyclopedic look at wrestling movies throughout the ages. If you weren't a wrestling fan before, you're welcome. Welcome to the fan club. I'm sure you are now. If you were a wrestling fan before, I hope you've enjoyed yourself, I guess. And that really just leaves us with one simple question to answer, as we always do. Anthony, what is your favourite movie this week?
Beyond the Mat.
Okay, it's a good shout. Mine is Predator because Jesse the Body Ventura is in that movie, and I'm cheating. We are not doing.
I was gonna say Spider-Man 1, but
we didn't mention Spider-Man 1. Bonesaw is ready.
He also appears ready to rumble.
He turns up in like a dream sequence because they can only get him for one day, and they're like, "Shit, we haven't got Hogan, we haven't got Nash, we haven't got Hall. We got to get Macho Man in there somewhere." So he turns up in a dream sequence, never in the film again. You'll be grateful to know that we're not doing a themed episode next week. We're back to movie diaries, so please look out for that. And all that's left for us to say really is thank you to Nancy Wyatt and Jared Iscariot for the use of our theme song. You can find links to their stuff down in the description below. Thank you to you for listening. Please give the show a like, subscribe to us on Culture Cave on YouTube, best movie podcast ever, on podcasting apps if that is your preferred method of consumption. And we will see you same time, same place next week.